I've never been one to ask for much. I raised my children, gave everything I could, and kept quiet in the face of hardships. I didn't need much in return, just respect. But it seems respect is too much to ask for now. When my daughter-in-law, Samantha, told me she was moving my things into the garage, I didn't argue. She called me an old hag, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe she thought I was deaf, maybe she thought I wouldn't care, but she didn't know the truth. My name is Lena Matthews, and at 72 years old, I thought I had seen enough of life's cruelties to last me several lifetimes. I was wrong. 3 years ago, when my beloved husband Thomas passed away from a sudden heart attack, I felt like half of my soul had been ripped away. We had been married for 48 years, and he was my anchor, my compass, my everything. The house we had built together, a modest 3-bedroom ranch on Maple Street, suddenly felt enormous and suffocating all at once. Every corner held memories of Thomas, his reading chair by the window, the coffee stains on the kitchen counter where he'd sit with his morning paper, the garden shed where he'd spend hours tinkering with his tools. For several months, I tried to manage on my own, but the isolation and the overwhelming nature of maintaining the house became too much. My son Mark, 38 years old and my only child, couldn't bear to see me struggling alone. He was a good man, or at least I had always believed him to be. Tall and lanky like his father, with kind brown eyes and a gentle demeanor that had made him popular throughout school. He worked as a mid-level manager at a logistics company, nothing glamorous, but steady work that provided for his family. "Mom, you can't stay here alone," he had said that autumn day, his voice thick with concern as he surveyed the house that had become too much for me to maintain. "The yard work, the repairs, the isolation, it's not good for you. Come stay with us. Samantha and I have plenty of room." His wife, Samantha, stood beside him that day, her perfectly manicured smile never quite reaching her ice-blue eyes. 34 years old, blonde, and immaculately put together, she had always struck me as someone who calculated every move, every word, every expression. She worked part-time as a real estate agent, though she treated it more like a hobby than a career, preferring to focus on what she called building their dream life. "Of course, Lena," she had said, her voice honey-sweet but somehow hollow. "We'd love to have you. It would only be temporary, of course, until you figure out what you want to do next." But as the months turned into years, temporary became permanent, and Samantha's facade began to crack. At first, things weren't terrible. I had my own room, the small guest bedroom at the end of the hall, and I tried to make myself useful. I cooked meals, kept the house tidy, and helped with my grandson, 8-year-old Tyler, when he came to visit every other weekend. Tyler was Mark's son from his first marriage to a woman named Janet, who had moved to California after their divorce. The boy was a delight, curious, energetic, and starving for attention that his busy father often couldn't provide. I cherished those weekends with Tyler. We would bake cookies together, and I would tell him stories about his grandfather Thomas, whom he barely remembered. Tyler would sit cross-legged on my bed, eyes wide with wonder as I recounted tales of Thomas's youth, his service in Vietnam, and the way he could fix anything with his bare hands. But Samantha resented even these small joys. She would hover in doorways, watching Tyler and me with narrowed eyes, making comments about spoiling him or filling his head with old stories. When Tyler would run to me for comfort after scraping a knee or when he was tired, Samantha would intercept him. "Tyler, you're too old to be running to Grandma for every little thing," she would say, her voice sharp. "You need to learn to be more independent." Mark, bless his heart, seemed oblivious to the growing tension. He worked long hours and traveled frequently for his job, leaving Samantha and me to navigate the increasingly hostile waters of our shared living arrangement. When he was home, Samantha transformed back into the sweet, accommodating wife, all smiles and gentle touches. But the moment his car pulled out of the driveway, her true nature emerged. The passive-aggressive comments started small. "Oh, Lena, you really don't need to rearrange the pantry. I have a system." Or, "I hope you don't mind, but I've asked you to keep your things in your room. We're trying to maintain a certain aesthetic in the common areas." I bit my tongue, attributed her behavior to stress, and tried harder to stay out of her way. But as time wore on, Samantha's resentment grew bolder. She began making comments about my age, my appearance, my outdated way of doing things. When I would offer to help with household tasks, she would sigh dramatically and redo everything I had done, making sure I was watching. She started eating dinner before I came to the table, leaving me to eat alone in the kitchen. She changed the television channels when I was watching something, claiming she had scheduled recordings that couldn't be missed. The breaking point came gradually, like water slowly, wearing away stone. About 6 months before my surgery, Samantha announced that her parents, Harold and Margaret Preston, would be moving in with us. Harold was 68 and had recently been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Margaret, at 65, couldn't handle caring for him alone in their current apartment. "It's only fair," Samantha said during one of our increasingly rare family dinners. "My parents need help, just like Mark's mom needed help when she moved in." Mark nodded absently, not catching the way she had phrased it, as if my need for family support was equivalent to being a burden that had to be endured. "Where will they stay?" Mark asked, cutting into his pot roast, a recipe I had taught Samantha years earlier, though she never credited me for it. "Well," Samantha said, her voice taking on that calculated sweetness I had learned to dread, "I was thinking they could take the guest room. It's the most comfortable, and Dad will need easy access to the bathroom." The guest room. My room. I felt my fork pause midway to my mouth, but I said nothing. Mark looked up from his plate, finally sensing the implications. "But, Mom," he started. "Oh, don't worry about me," I said quickly, not wanting to cause conflict. "I can make do somewhere else." Samantha's smile widened. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. The garage has been sitting empty since we cleaned it out last spring. With a little work, it could be quite cozy. More privacy for you, Lena. Your own space." The garage. She wanted to move me into the garage like I was an old car or a broken lawnmower to be stored away. Mark frowned. "Sam, I don't think. It's fine," I said, though every word felt like swallowing glass. "I don't need much space." And that's how it was decided. Not through discussion or family consideration, but through my own inability to stand up for myself and Mark's unwillingness to confront his wife's increasingly cruel behavior. 3 months later, I was scheduled for gallbladder surgery. It was supposed to be routine, laparoscopic, minimally invasive, a few days in the hospital, and then home to recover. Dr. Harrison, my surgeon, assured me it was a common procedure for someone my age. "You'll be back on your feet in no time, Mrs. Matthews," he said with professional confidence. I had been experiencing severe abdominal pain for weeks, but I had delayed seeking treatment, not wanting to be more of a burden than I already felt I was. When the pain finally became unbearable, Mark insisted on taking me to the emergency room. The night before my surgery, as I lay in the sterile hospital bed listening to the beeping monitors and distant conversations of the nursing staff, I felt an odd sense of peace. For the first time in months, I was away from Samantha's constant disapproval and Mark's guilty avoidance. The nurses were kind, treating me with the respect and dignity I had almost forgotten I deserved. Mark visited me the evening before the procedure, bringing flowers, daisies, my favorites, and a worried expression. "I'm sorry I can't stay longer, Mom," he said, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair. "I have that presentation tomorrow morning, and Samantha has her parents coming to look at the house." Even then, facing surgery, I was secondary to his work obligations and his wife's plans. "It's fine, sweetheart," I assured him, though it wasn't fine at all. "Dr. Harrison says it's routine. I'll be home before you know it." He squeezed my hand, and for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be. The one who would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who would bring me dandelions from the yard and call them the most beautiful flowers in the world. "I love you, Mom," he said quietly. "I love you too, Mark." The surgery went well, according to Dr. Harrison, but my recovery was slower than expected. What should have been a 2-day hospital stay stretched into 5 days due to complications with the anesthesia and my body's slower healing response. I was weak, disoriented, and needed assistance with basic tasks like walking to the bathroom and eating. Mark visited twice during those 5 days, both times briefly and both times with apologies about work commitments and helping Samantha prepare for her parents' arrival. I told myself it was understandable. Life couldn't stop because I was in the hospital. What I didn't know was that while I lay in that hospital bed, struggling to keep down clear breaths and learning to walk again without doubling over in pain, Samantha was systematically erasing me from what had been my home for 3 years. On the day I was discharged, Mark picked me up alone. Samantha had an important showing that couldn't be rescheduled. During the quiet drive home, I noticed Mark seemed tense, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Mom," he said as we turned onto their street, "there have been some changes while you were in the hospital." My stomach clenched, and it had nothing to do with my surgical site. "What kind of changes?" I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know. "Well, Harold and Margaret arrived yesterday. They needed to get settled quickly, because Harold had an episode at their old place and—" He trailed off, unable to meet my eyes in the rearview mirror. We pulled into the driveway, and I could see moving boxes stacked on the front porch. Through the front window, I glimpsed unfamiliar figures moving around inside. Mark came around to help me out of the car, his movements careful and apologetic. As we walked slowly toward the front door, me still moving gingerly from the surgery, he cleared his throat. "Your things. Samantha thought it would be better to get everything set up while you were recovering, so you wouldn't have to deal with the disruption." The front door opened before we reached it, and Samantha appeared, her smile bright and terrible.
"Lena."
"Welcome home. I hope you're feeling better." Behind her, I could see 2 elderly figures in what used to be my living room. Harold, a thin man with thinning gray hair and confused eyes, sat in my favorite reading chair, the one I had brought from my old house. Margaret, a sharp-faced woman who looked remarkably like an older version of Samantha, was directing the placement of boxes with military precision. "Where are my things?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Samantha's smile never wavered. "Oh, we've got you all set up in your new space. Much more private, just like we discussed. Come on, I'll show you." She led me not toward the hallway where my room had been, but toward the side door that led to the garage. My blood turned to ice. "Samantha," I said, stopping in my tracks despite the pain in my abdomen. "What do you mean?" "Your new room," she announced cheerfully, opening the side door with a flourish. "We've been working so hard to get it ready for you." The garage had been transformed, but not in any way that suggested care or consideration. My furniture, my dresser, my small television, my rocking chair, had been crammed into the space like items in a storage unit. A small space heater sat in the corner, along with a single bed that definitely wasn't mine. The concrete floor had been covered with cheap area rugs that didn't quite meet in the middle. A makeshift bathroom had been created in the far corner using a hospital curtain for privacy, with a portable toilet and a small sink clearly intended for a workshop, not human habitation. The smell hit me then. A combination of motor oil, dust, and the lingering dampness that comes from a space never intended for human habitation. "This is your room now, you old hag," Samantha said, her voice dropping its artificial sweetness for the first time in front of Mark. My parents are moving in. They need the real bedroom. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. The casual cruelty of it, the way she said old hag like it was my name, like it was what I deserved. I turned to look at my son, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to show some shock at his wife's behavior. Mark stood there, his face pale but his mouth firmly shut. He looked at me with what might have been pity, but he said nothing. Absolutely nothing. Mark, I whispered, my voice breaking. He looked away, focusing on a spot somewhere above my head. That's when I knew. This wasn't Samantha acting alone in a moment of stress or frustration. This was planned, calculated. And my son, my only child, the boy I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, was complicit. The bed should be comfortable, Samantha continued, as if she hadn't just destroyed what remained of my dignity. And look, you have your own entrance now. Complete independence. Independence. She made it sound like a gift rather than an exile. I walked slowly into the garage, my body still weak from surgery, my mind struggling to comprehend this new reality. My belongings looked foreign in this space, like artifacts from someone else's life. The rocking chair where I used to read to Tyler sat next to a stack of paint cans. My mother's china, still in boxes, was wedged between a bicycle and some Christmas decorations. I'll leave you to get settled, Samantha said brightly. Dinner's at 6, same as always. But even that small mercy was a lie. When 6 o'clock came, I made my way slowly back into the house, my body still protesting every movement. The dining room table was set for 4 people. Harold and Margaret sat in what used to be my seat and Mark's seat, while Mark and Samantha occupied the other 2 chairs. Oh, Lena, Samantha said, without looking up from her conversation with her mother about redecorating the living room. We've started eating earlier now that Dad's schedule is so important. His medication needs to be taken with food at specific times. There's a plate for you in the kitchen. A plate for me in the kitchen. Not a place at the table, not an acknowledgement that I was family, but a plate in the kitchen like I was hired help. I stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting for Mark to say something. He glanced up at me briefly, his eyes filled with what might have been shame, but still, he said nothing. That night, lying on the unfamiliar bed in the cold garage, listening to the sounds of the family, I was no longer truly part of settling down for the evening. I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out where everything had gone so wrong. I thought about Thomas, about the life we had built together, about the dreams we had shared. We had been careful with money, frugal but not miserly. Thomas had always been good with investments, and after his death, I had let our financial advisor, Mr. Brennan, continue managing what Thomas had left behind. I rarely thought about money. It had never been important to me beyond having enough to get by. But lying there in that garage, being treated like a burden and an inconvenience, I realized I had never actually looked at what Thomas had left behind. I had signed papers, trusted Mr. Brennan, and assumed there was enough to cover my basic needs until I died. The next morning, while the family ate breakfast together in the dining room, a scene I could observe through the kitchen window from my garage exile, I called Mr. Brennan's office. Mrs. Matthews, his secretary, Linda, sounded delighted to hear from me. How are you feeling? Mr. Brennan heard about your surgery from Mark. I'm recovering, thank you. I was wondering if I could schedule an appointment to discuss my finances. It's been several years since I've looked at everything properly. Of course. Mr. Brennan has been wanting to meet with you anyway. There are some things he'd like to discuss. How about tomorrow afternoon? The next day, I took a taxi to Mr. Brennan's office downtown, not wanting to ask Mark for a ride and certainly not wanting to deal with Samantha's fake concern about where I was going. Robert Brennan had been Thomas's financial advisor for 20 years, a kindly man in his 60s with silver hair and a warm smile. His office hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there, right after Thomas's funeral. "Lena," he said, rising from behind his mahogany desk to embrace me gently. "You look well, considering. Mark told me about the surgery." "I'm healing," I said, settling into the comfortable leather chair across from his desk. "Bob, I need to understand where I stand financially. I feel like I've been in a fog for the past few years." He nodded understandingly. "Grief can do that. Thomas always worried about leaving you with too many financial details to handle. He made sure everything was set up to be as simple as possible for you." Bob pulled out a thick folder and opened it on his desk. "Before we get into the details, I want you to know that Thomas was an exceptional investor and planner. Even with the market fluctuations over the past few years, your portfolio has performed remarkably well." He began showing me documents, explaining in simple terms what each investment meant, how they had performed, and what kind of income they were generating. As the numbers began to add up in my mind, I felt a strange sensation, like the ground was shifting beneath me. "Bob," I interrupted, staring at a summary sheet he had handed me. "This can't be right." "What can't be right?" "These numbers. This says." I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "This says I'm worth over $10 million. Bob smiled. $10,347,000 to be precise, as of last month's statement. Thomas was very good at what he did, Lena. He started investing early, lived below your means, and made some very smart choices over the years. The life insurance policy alone was $2 million, but with the real estate investments, the stock portfolio, and the compound interest over the past 5 years." I stared at him, unable to process what he was telling me. $10 million? You're a wealthy woman, Lena. Thomas wanted to make sure you would never have to worry about money, never have to depend on anyone else if you didn't want to. Never have to depend on anyone else. The irony was almost laughable. There I was, living in a garage, being called an old hag by my daughter-in-law, eating dinner alone in the kitchen, believing I was a burden on my family, and I was worth more than $10 million. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. "Thomas asked me to let you grieve, to not burden you with financial decisions for at least 2 years. After that, you seemed to be managing fine living with your son, and frankly, I assumed Mark was helping you understand everything. The quarterly statements have been going to your address, Mark's address, where Samantha collected all the mail." "I haven't seen any statements," I said quietly. Bob frowned. "That's odd. They should have been arriving regularly. Would you like me to change the address? Perhaps have them sent to a P.O. box?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I think that would be best." We spent another hour going over the details of my financial situation. I learned that I own not just the investments, but also 3 rental properties that Thomas had purchased over the years, properties that were generating substantial monthly income. I discovered that my original house on Maple Street, which I had assumed was sold to pay for various expenses, was actually still in my name, the taxes paid automatically from one of my accounts. "You could buy a mansion tomorrow if you wanted to," Bob said with a chuckle. "Or travel the world. Or both." As I sat in that taxi on the way back to what I had been calling home, my mind reeled with the implications of what I had learned. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't dependent on Mark and Samantha's charity. I was a woman of considerable means who had been allowing herself to be treated like garbage. But more than that, I was a woman who had been systematically isolated from information about her own life. Samantha had been collecting my mail, which meant she knew exactly how much money I had. She knew I could afford my own place, my own care, my own independence. And she had said nothing. They all knew. Mark, Samantha, they all knew I didn't need their help, that I wasn't the burden I believed myself to be. Yet they had let me think I was penniless and dependent while they treated me with increasing cruelty. But if they knew about my money, why were they treating me so badly? Wouldn't it make more sense to be kind, to try to curry favor with a wealthy relative? The answer came to me as the taxi pulled into the driveway. They didn't expect me to live much longer. I was 72 years old, had just had surgery, and had no other family. In their minds, I was a temporary inconvenience before they inherited everything. Mark was my only child, which made him my likely heir. All they had to do was endure my presence for a few more years, and then they would inherit a fortune. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had pushed me too far. That evening, I made several phone calls from the privacy of my garage. I called a real estate agent, not Samantha, but a competing firm, and asked about selling my house on Maple Street. I called a property management company about finding a nice apartment or small home to rent. And I called a lawyer. The lawyer, Patricia Wong, came highly recommended from Mr. Brennan. She specialized in elder law and estate planning. We made an appointment for the following week. For the next few days, I played the role they expected me to play. I was quiet, meek, staying out of the way in my garage room, eating my solitary meals in the kitchen, and keeping my interactions with the family to a minimum. But I was watching, and I was planning. I observed how Samantha treated her parents versus how she treated me. Harold and Margaret got the good bedroom, the comfortable chairs, the places of honor at the dinner table. They were served meals on the good china, offered choices about what to watch on television, consulted about household decisions. They were treated like valued family members. Meanwhile, I was expected to be grateful for my garage accommodations and my kitchen meals. I watched Mark, too, looking for any sign that the son I had raised was still in there somewhere. But he seemed to have completely abdicated his role as my advocate. When Tyler came for his weekend visits, Mark barely acknowledged the boy's confusion about why Grandma was living in the garage now. "It's just temporary," I heard him tell Tyler when the boy asked why I wasn't at the dinner table anymore. "Grandma likes having her own space." Even 8-year-old Tyler could see through that lie. "But why does she look so sad all the time?" Tyler asked. Mark didn't have an answer for that. The appointment with Patricia Wong opened my eyes even further. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked black hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Matthews," she said after I had explained my situation, "what you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse." "But they're not taking my money," I protested. "Financial abuse isn't always about theft. It can be about isolation, manipulation, and creating dependence. By intercepting your mail, by allowing you to believe you were financially dependent on them while knowing you weren't, by treating you as less than family while expecting to inherit your wealth, that's a form of financial abuse." She leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" I thought about that for a long moment. What did I want? I wanted my dignity back. I wanted to be treated with respect. I wanted my son to remember that he had a mother who had loved and supported him his entire life. But more than anything, I wanted them to understand that their actions had consequences. "I want them to know they made a mistake," I said finally. Patricia smiled. "I think we can arrange that." Over the next week, Patricia and I worked together to restructure my will and establish some new legal protections for myself. The process was both empowering and heartbreaking. Empowering because I was finally taking control of my own life again. Heartbreaking because it meant acknowledging that my relationship with my son might be irreparably damaged. In my original will, Mark inherited everything. It was a simple arrangement that Thomas and I had set up years earlier. Everything to our son, with the assumption that he would use the inheritance responsibly and care for any grandchildren appropriately. But Mark had failed to care for me appropriately when I was alive. Why should I trust him to honor my wishes after I was gone? My new will was more complex. Instead of leaving everything to Mark, I established a trust fund for Tyler's education and future needs. I left generous donations to several charities that had been important to Thomas and me. I left a small amount to Mark, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to be wealthy. And I left a very specific amount to Samantha, $1. In legal terms, leaving someone $1 ensures that they cannot claim they were forgotten in the will. It makes it clear that their exclusion was intentional. But the will was just the beginning. Patricia had other suggestions. You mentioned your house on Maple Street is still in your name, she said. Have you considered moving back there? I had considered it, but the house felt like a tomb full of memories of Thomas. It's too big for me now, and too full of the past. What if it wasn't? What if you made it into something new? That got my attention. I have a client, Patricia continued, who runs a nonprofit that helps elderly people age in place with dignity. They create communities within existing homes, small groups of seniors who live together, share resources, and support each other. It's like a family, but one built on choice rather than obligation. The idea intrigued me. Thomas and I had always talked about how we wanted to grow old surrounded by friends and chosen family, people who cared about each other by choice rather than duty. Tell me more, I said. Over the next few weeks, while continuing to live in the garage and maintain my facade of helpless dependency, I worked with Patricia and her nonprofit contact to develop a plan. My house on Maple Street would be renovated to accommodate for elderly residents, including myself. We would share common spaces while maintaining private bedrooms and bathrooms. There would be assistance available for those who needed it, but the emphasis would be on independence and mutual support. It was perfect. It was exactly what Thomas would have wanted for me. But first, I needed to handle the situation with Mark and Samantha. The opportunity came 3 weeks after my meeting with Patricia. I had been back from the hospital for nearly a month, and my routine in the garage had become numbingly predictable. I woke up each morning to the sound of the family's breakfast conversations drifting from the kitchen window. I waited until they were finished before venturing inside to make my own simple breakfast. I spent my days reading, doing small needlework projects, or sitting in the small folding chair outside the garage when the weather was nice. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that I overheard Samantha on the phone in the backyard. She was talking loudly, apparently not realizing that sound carried easily from the patio to the garage. I know it's awful, Mom, but it's only temporary, she was saying. The old bat can't have that much time left, and then Mark inherits everything. My blood ran cold.
What?
Of course I know how much she's worth, Samantha continued. I've been collecting her mail for 3 years. Do you think I'm stupid? She's sitting on millions, and she's too senile to even know it. Senile. She thought I was senile. The best part is, she actually thinks she's poor. She thinks we're doing her some kind of favor, letting her live here. She has no idea that she could buy and sell us 10 times over. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Mark? Oh, Mark just does what I tell him. He feels guilty about his mother, but he's not going to rock the boat. He knows which side his bread is buttered on, if you know what I mean. Another pause. Trust me, the minute she kicks the bucket, we're going to be set for life. All we have to do is wait it out. I sat in my folding chair, invisible behind the small window, listening to my daughter-in-law discuss my death like it was a business transaction. That night, I called Patricia. It's time, I said simply. Are you sure? I'm sure. The next morning, I put the final phase of our plan into motion. I called a moving company and arranged for them to come the following day to collect my belongings from the garage. I called the renovation crew that had been waiting for my green light to begin transforming my house on Maple Street. And I called the process server. The process server would deliver a letter to Samantha, not a legal document, but a personal communication that would make a few things very clear. I spent that day quietly packing my few belongings, saying goodbye to the garage that had been both my prison and my awakening. As I folded my clothes and wrapped my mother's china, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. excitement about the future. That evening, I joined the family for dinner one last time. Not in the kitchen with my sad little plate, but at the dining room table. I simply walked in and sat down in the empty chair. Harold and Margaret were visiting other relatives for the week, so there was room. "Mom," Mark said, surprised to see me at the table. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, sweetheart," I said calmly. "I just wanted to have dinner with my family." Samantha looked annoyed, but said nothing. The meal proceeded quietly, with stilted conversation about Mark's work and Tyler's upcoming visit. As we were finishing dessert, a store-bought pie that I would have made from scratch in the old days, I cleared my throat. "I have an announcement," I said. Both Mark and Samantha looked up expectantly. "I've decided to move back to my house on Maple Street," I said calmly. "I think it's time for me to have my independence back." Mark looked relieved. Samantha looked positively gleeful. "That's wonderful, Mom," Mark said. "I think that's probably for the best. You'll be more comfortable in your own space." "I think so too," Samantha agreed quickly. "And it'll give you more privacy. More freedom to do whatever you want." More freedom for them, she meant. "The movers will be here tomorrow morning to collect my things," I continued. "I wanted to give you advance notice." "Of course," Mark said. "Do you need help with anything? Money for the movers or—" "Oh no," I said with a small smile. "I can handle the expenses myself. I've recently discovered that I'm much more financially secure than I thought." Something flickered in Samantha's eyes, but she kept her expression neutral. "Well, that's good," Mark said awkwardly. "I'm glad you're secure." The next morning, the moving truck arrived promptly at 8 o'clock. I supervised as they carefully loaded my furniture, my boxes, and my belongings. The garage, which had been my humiliating exile, was quickly emptied of any trace of my presence. Mark had already left for work, but Samantha stood in the driveway watching the proceedings with barely contained excitement. She was probably already planning how to use the garage space, maybe a home gym or an art studio, or just storage for all the things that would make their life more comfortable. "I'll be in touch," I told her as I climbed into the taxi that would take me to my new life. "Oh, of course," she said with that fake smile. "We'll have to have you over for dinner soon." We both knew that would never happen. The house on Maple Street looked different than I remembered, but not in a bad way. The renovation crew had been working efficiently, and the changes were already taking shape. What had once been Thomas's workshop was being converted into a comfortable bedroom suite. The basement was being finished into a cozy apartment. The main floor was being reconfigured to include 2 bedrooms with private baths while maintaining spacious common areas. By Christmas, it would be ready for my new chosen family of housemates. But first, there was one more piece of business to attend to. The letter was delivered to Samantha 3 days after I moved out. I wasn't there to witness her reaction, of course, but Patricia had arranged for the process server to be very thorough in his description of the delivery. According to his report, Samantha answered the door in her yoga clothes, clearly expecting a package delivery or a routine service call. When he handed her the official-looking envelope and asked her to sign for it, she had seemed mildly curious but not concerned. It was only after she opened the letter and began reading that her demeanor changed dramatically. The letter was simple and direct. "Dear Samantha, I wanted to thank you for the valuable lesson you taught me during my recovery from surgery. You showed me exactly how you and Mark view me, not as family, but as a burden to be tolerated until I'm no longer inconvenient. You called me an old hag and moved me into the garage like discarded furniture. You excluded me from family meals and gatherings. You treated me with less respect than you would show a stranger. But most importantly, you taught me something about my own worth. You see, while you were intercepting my mail and allowing me to believe I was financially dependent on your charity, I discovered something interesting. I am worth $10,347,000. That's $10,347,000, Samantha. More money than you and Mark will see in several lifetimes. I heard your phone conversation in the backyard. I know you've been aware of my financial situation for years. I know you were counting on my death to make you wealthy. I know you've been treating me like garbage while believing you would inherit everything. You were wrong. I have instructed my attorney to make some changes to my will. Mark will receive a modest inheritance, enough to live comfortably, but nothing resembling the fortune you were expecting. Tyler will be well provided for through a trust fund for his education and future. You, however, will receive exactly what you deserve, $1. This is not an oversight. This is recognition of the value you place on family, respect, and human dignity. I hope the garage serves you well when you can no longer afford your mortgage. Sincerely, Lena Matthews, the old hag, worth $10 million according to the process server. Samantha had read the letter twice before the screaming started. No, 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 and oh, she had shrieked, her voice carrying clearly to the neighbors' yards. This can't be happening. She can't do this. She had called Mark immediately, her voice hysterical. The process server could hear her side of the phone conversation as he walked back to his car. Mark, you need to get home right now. Your mother? She's worth millions.
Millions.
And she's cutting us out of her will. There was a pause as Mark apparently tried to process this information. I don't care if you're in a meeting. Get home now. We are fucked, Mark. Do you understand? We are completely fucked. The screaming continued for another 10 minutes, during which Samantha called me every name in the book and several that probably weren't. She threw the letter on the ground, stomped on it, then picked it up and read it again, as if hoping the words had changed. By the time Mark arrived home an hour later, she had worked herself into a state of absolute fury mixed with panic. I know all of this because Patricia had suggested I might want to have some documentation of their reaction. A private investigator with a long-range camera and audio equipment had captured the entire scene from a legally appropriate distance. Watching the footage later, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. After months of being treated like nothing, there was a deep gratification in seeing Samantha realize that her cruelty had cost her everything she thought she was entitled to. But there was sadness, too. Sadness for the family relationships that had been irreparably damaged. Sadness for Tyler, who would grow up knowing his father had chosen greed and cowardice over protecting his own mother. And sadness for the son I had raised, who I now realized was not the man I thought he was. Mark's reaction to the letter was different from Samantha's. While she raged and screamed, he seemed to deflate. When he arrived home and found his wife in hysterics, waving the letter around like evidence of some cosmic injustice, he read it quietly. Then he sat down heavily on his front steps and put his head in his hands. She knew, he said quietly. All this time, she knew we knew about the money. Of course she knew, you idiot. Samantha snapped. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Do about it? Mark looked up at his wife with something that might have been disgust. Sam, we treated my mother like garbage. We put her in the garage and called her an old hag. What exactly do you think we can do about it? We can contest the will. We can claim she's mentally incompetent. She's not mentally incompetent, Mark said wearily. She's probably the smartest person in this whole situation. She played us perfectly. Then we go to her. We apologize. We beg. We what? Mark stood up, and for the first time since I had known him, he seemed to have found his spine. We grovel to try to get back into the will? Sam, listen to yourself.
She's right.
We treated her horribly because we thought we could get away with it. Because we thought she had no choice but to take it. She didn't have a choice. She was living here for free. She was living here for free because we let her believe she couldn't afford anything else. while we knew damn well she was a millionaire. Samantha stared at him as the full implications of their situation began to sink in. Without my inheritance, they would continue to live paycheck to paycheck in a house they could barely afford. Mark's job was steady, but not lucrative. Samantha's real estate career was sporadic at best. They had been counting on my money to transform their lives. Now, instead of inheriting millions, they faced the reality that I could outlive them both. I was in good health for my age, and with proper medical care, which I could now afford, I might live another 15 or 20 years. They could be stuck in their modest lifestyle for decades while I lived comfortably on my fortune. The irony was delicious. Over the following weeks, I watched from a distance as the reality of their situation set in. Mark made several attempts to contact me, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails on my new phone number. "Mom, please call me back. I know we need to talk. I know I made mistakes, but you're still my mother. Mom, it's Mark again. She's not handling this well. Can we please just talk?"
Mom, I'm sorry.
I should have said that first. I'm sorry for everything. Please, just give me a chance to make this right. I didn't return his calls. Not because I was heartless, but because Patricia had advised me to let them stew for a while. "If you respond too quickly," she said, "they'll think your anger is just a temporary tantrum. Let them understand that actions have consequences." Meanwhile, my new life was taking shape beautifully. The renovations on my house were proceeding ahead of schedule, and I had found my first housemate. A delightful woman named Rose, who was a retired teacher. We had similar interests and complementary skills. She was an excellent cook who missed having people to cook for. I was a good organizer who enjoyed managing household tasks. My second housemate was Frank, a widower who had been a carpenter before retirement. He was looking forward to having projects to work on around the house and people to share meals with. The third would be Eleanor, a former nurse who was interested in the mutual support aspect of our arrangement. We were going to be a family by choice, bound together not by obligation or genetics, but by shared values and genuine affection. 3 weeks after the letter was delivered, Tyler's weekend visit provided an unexpected development. Mark had clearly been struggling with how to explain the situation to his 8-year-old son. According to what I heard later, he had tried to present it as Grandma decided she wanted to live in her own house again. But Tyler was a perceptive child, and he had questions. Why can't I go visit Grandma at her house? Why does Mommy Sam cry every time someone mentions Grandma? Why did Grandma look so sad when she was living in the garage? Children, I've learned, have an uncomfortable way of cutting through adult self-deception. On Saturday afternoon, Tyler apparently asked the question that broke Mark completely. "Daddy, did we do something mean to Grandma?" Mark, according to what I learned later, burst into tears. That evening, Tyler did something that surprised everyone. He called me Grandma. His young voice was uncertain but determined. "It's Tyler." "Hello, sweetheart," I said, my heart aching with love for this innocent child caught in the middle of adult dysfunction. "How are you?"
I'm okay.
"Daddy gave me your new phone number. He said I could call you." "I'm glad you did. I've missed you." "Grandma, why don't you live with us anymore?" It was the question I had been dreading, because Tyler deserved honesty, but he was too young for the full truth. "Sometimes grown-ups need to make changes in their living arrangements," I said carefully. "I have my own house now, and I'm very happy there." "But why were you living in the garage? That seemed weird." Out of the mouths of babes. "You're right, sweetheart. It was weird, and it wasn't a very nice way for me to live." There was a long pause. Then, "Daddy says he made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "He says he forgot to be a good son. He's been crying a lot." My heart twisted. Part of me wanted to hate Mark for what he had allowed to happen, but he was still my child, still the little boy I had raised and loved. "Tyler, I said gently. Would you like to come visit me at my new house? We could bake cookies, and I could show you my garden. Really? Daddy would let me. I think your daddy would be very happy if you visited me. The visit was arranged for the following Saturday. Mark drove Tyler to my house, but didn't come to the door. I watched from the window as my son sat in his car for several minutes after Tyler got out, staring at the house where he had grown up, perhaps remembering better times. Tyler loved the house and was fascinated by the renovations. He helped me plant bulbs in the garden and listened with wide eyes as I told him about my future housemates. So you're going to have new family? He asked. Chosen family, I corrected. People who want to live together and take care of each other. That sounds nice. Better than regular family. Why do you say that? Because regular family sometimes isn't very nice to each other. The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze me. As Tyler was getting ready to leave, he asked the question I had been expecting. Grandma, are you rich? Why do you ask that? Because Mommy Sam keeps yelling about money, and Daddy looks scared all the time now. I knelt down to Tyler's level. I have enough money to take care of myself and to make sure you're taken care of too. That's what matters. Are you mad at Daddy? It was the hardest question he could have asked. I'm disappointed in some choices your daddy made, I said finally. But I will always love him, just like I will always love you. Will you forgive him? I hope so, sweetheart. But forgiveness takes time, and it requires people to really understand what they did wrong. When Mark came to pick up Tyler, he finally got out of the car. We stood on my front porch, the place where he had played as a child, and looked at each other across a chasm of hurt and betrayal. Mom, he said quietly, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if you can fix it, Mark. I know I was wrong. I know I should have stood up for you. I was a coward. Yes, you were. He flinched at my bluntness, but didn't argue. Samantha says I should beg you to change your will back. Is that what you want to do?
Beg.
Mark was quiet for a long moment.
No.
I don't think I deserve your money, Mom. I think Tyler deserves to be taken care of, and I'm grateful you're doing that.
But me?
I need to figure out how to live with what I've done. It was the first thing he had said that gave me hope. What about Samantha? Samantha is not handling this well. She's talking about divorce lawyers and taking Tyler and moving in with her parents. And how do you feel about that? Honestly, I think it might be for the best. I've been seeing a therapist, Mom, trying to understand how I became the kind of man who would let his wife treat his mother the way Samantha treated you. What have you learned? That I've been a people pleaser my whole life. That I avoided conflict even when conflict was necessary. That I chose the easy path instead of the right path.
He paused.
And that I failed the most important test of my character when it came to protecting someone I love. Tears were running down his face now, and despite everything, I felt my heart soften slightly. I don't expect you to forgive me, he continued. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I want you to know that I see what I did. I see what I didn't do. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better. For Tyler's sake, I hope that's true. For everyone's sake. As winter turned to spring, my new life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Rose, Frank, Eleanor, and I had become exactly the family I had hoped for, supportive, respectful, and genuinely fond of each other. We shared meals, celebrated birthdays, and looked out for each other in the ways that matter. Mark and Samantha divorced that spring. The proceedings were ugly, with Samantha fighting for custody of Tyler and claiming that Mark's mental instability made him an unfit parent. She seemed to think that if she could get full custody of Tyler, she could somehow use him as leverage to get back into my good graces. She was wrong about that, as she had been wrong about so many things. Mark was awarded joint custody, and Tyler continued to visit me regularly. The boy was resilient, adapting to his parents' divorce with the flexibility that children often show. He loved coming to Grandma's house with all the nice people, and my housemates doted on him. Frank taught him woodworking. Rose helped him with his homework. Eleanor told him stories about her adventures as a young nurse. He was getting the kind of extended family support that many children never experience. As for my relationship with Mark, it evolved slowly. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. But over the months, I began to see genuine changes in my son. He was more assertive with his ex-wife, more attentive to Tyler, and more honest about his own failings. The turning point came nearly a year after the letter incident. Mark came to visit, as he had been doing regularly, but this time he brought something with him, a letter of his own. "I wrote this for you," he said, handing me a thick envelope. "But I also wrote it for me, and for Tyler. I wanted to put down on paper everything I should have said a long time ago." The letter was 8 pages long, handwritten in Mark's careful script. In it, he detailed not just his apologies, but his understanding of how his actions had affected me. He wrote about his childhood, about how I had sacrificed for him, about the ways I had shown him love and support throughout his life. He wrote about his marriage to Samantha, about how he had gradually allowed her opinions to override his own judgment, about how he had convinced himself that keeping peace in his marriage was more important than protecting his mother. But most importantly, he wrote about the man he wanted to become, for himself, for Tyler, and for me. "I know I can't undo what I did," he wrote. "I can't give you back the dignity I allowed Samantha to take from you. I can't erase the months you spent in that garage, believing you were a burden when you were actually a woman of means and accomplishment. I can't take back my silence when I should have spoken up, my cowardice when I should have been brave. But I can promise you this: I will never again allow anyone to treat you with disrespect in my presence. I will never again choose the easy path over the right path when it comes to protecting the people I love. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being your son." I cried reading that letter. I cried for the time we had lost, for the relationship that had been damaged, and for the pain we had both endured. But I also cried with relief, because I could see in his words the man I had raised, the good heart that had been buried under years of poor choices and misplaced priorities. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a single moment, but a process. It doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It means choosing to move forward together despite the hurt, choosing to rebuild something new from the pieces of what was broken. Mark and I began that process slowly. Family dinners at my house, holidays together, gradual rebuilding of trust through consistent actions over time. As for Samantha, she moved back in with her parents after the divorce. Without Mark's income and with no prospect of inheriting my fortune, she struggled financially. Her real estate career never recovered from the distraction of the divorce proceedings, and she found herself working retail jobs to make ends meet. I heard through Tyler that she had tried several times to contact me directly, offering apologies that sounded more like negotiations than genuine remorse. I never responded. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. The last I heard, she was dating a man she met at her retail job, someone who was apparently impressed by her claims of having connections to wealth. I wondered if she had learned anything from her experience with me, but I suspected she had not. Some people see consequences as unfair obstacles rather than natural results of their choices. Tyler, now 9 years old, continued to be the bright spot in our family constellation. He split his time between his father's modest apartment and my comfortable house, thriving in both environments. He had learned early the difference between wealth and worth, between having money and having character. One evening, as we sat in my garden watching the sunset, Tyler, Mark, and me, Tyler asked a question that showed his growing wisdom. "Grandma, if you hadn't been rich, would Daddy still have learned to be nicer to you?" It was a profound question from such a young mind. I don't know, sweetheart, I answered honestly. Sometimes people need big consequences to understand that their actions matter. But you were always nice to people even when they weren't nice to you, Tyler observed. You didn't need consequences to be good. That's because being good isn't about what we get in return, I said. It's about who we choose to be. Mark was quiet during this exchange, but I could see him listening intently, still learning lessons that should have been obvious decades earlier. As I write this, 2 years have passed since the day I was discharged from a hospital to find my belongings moved to the garage. 2 years since I was called an old hag and treated like discarded furniture. 2 years since I discovered my own worth, not just financial, but personal. My house is full of laughter and friendship. Rose and I are planning a garden party for next month. Frank is teaching Tyler to build a birdhouse. Eleanor is knitting blankets for the local women's shelter. We are a family in the truest sense of the word. Mark has become the son I always hoped he could be, though it took losing my inheritance for him to find his integrity. He is building a new life based on his own efforts rather than expectations of inherited wealth. He is learning to be proud of what he earns rather than what he might receive. Tyler is growing into a thoughtful, kind young man who understands that love cannot be bought and respect must be earned. And me? I am exactly where I belong. In my own home, surrounded by people who chose to be here, treated with the dignity and respect that every human being deserves. The money that caused so much drama and revealed so many true colors? It sits quietly in my accounts, earning interest and providing security. But it is not what makes me wealthy. I am wealthy because I have love, respect, community, and purpose. I am wealthy because I learned to value myself. I am wealthy because I discovered that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. And I am wealthy because I finally understand that being called an old hag by someone who has no concept of dignity or character is actually a compliment. The little witch received her letter and wouldn't stop screaming, just as the title promised. But the real story was never about her screaming. It was about an old woman who found her voice, her strength, and her worth. It was about learning that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. It was about discovering that family is not defined by blood, but by how people choose to treat each other. And it was about understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept being treated poorly, regardless of who is doing the treating. I may be 74 years old now, but I have never felt more alive, more valued, or more hopeful about the future. The garage is empty now, used only for storing garden tools and holiday decorations, the purposes for which it was intended. And I am exactly where I belong. In the main house, at the head of my own table, surrounded by people who know my worth. That, more than any dollar amount, is what it means to be truly wealthy. Did Lena's story of strength and redemption inspire you? If you enjoyed reading about how she transformed from victim to victor, please give this story a like and subscribe for more tales of resilience, justice, and the power of knowing your worth. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who didn't respect you? Your story might inspire someone else to find their own strength. Remember, you are never too old to demand the respect you deserve, and it's never too late to build the life you want. Sometimes the best revenge truly is living well.